This is a brief lecture on Chapter 1 in Eric Foner's Give Me Liberty. Chapter 1, A New World. So, there are some problematic statements that you may have run across in your historical examinations. And one of these problematic statements is Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. Another problematic statement is Europeans discovered a new world. Now, these statements are problematic because they can be 100% true or they can be 100% false, depending on your perspective. So, let me give you an example. I plan on going on a vacation soon, and I plan on going to the continent of Australia. I have never been to Australia before in my entire life. So when I land in Australia and I get off that plane, I could start screaming and I could start yelling that, wow, I've discovered Australia. Because for me, in my perspective, it's my first time there and I'll be discovering it for the very first time. I'm going to go and jump around with the kangaroos. I'm going to go and cuddle with the koala bear. Um, but I've never been there before. And so, from my perspective, it will be like I'm discovering it for the very first time. Now, think about the inhabitants of Australia. They would look at me coming off the plane and they would think I was insane. They would think I was crazy. And they'd be like, we've been here. We have a civilization here. We have family that have been here for centuries. How dare you come here and tell me that you just discovered us? We've been here. And so this is why it's so problematic to say things like Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. On the perspective of Christopher Columbus, he did discover America in 1492 because he had never been there before. However, to the native population that was there, it wasn't a discovery. They had been there for centuries. Same thing with saying Europeans discovered a new world. It might be new to the European perspective, and yes, it might be a new world based upon the idea that the Native Americans' world would never be the same. But I think using the word a new world kind of infers that it's a place that no one has been to before and that there is plenty of land, plenty of resources. And the reality is, it's going to be a different world. So maybe not so much a new world as much as a very different world for both Europeans, natives, Africans, and many other groups that would follow afterwards. So, one of the most important things to understand about Chapter 1 is the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange, by definition, is a mutual transfer of diseases, plants, and animals from the 15th and 16th century European voyages and colonization. And so, the Columbian Exchange is going to be where you have plants and animals that only reside in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Now, the reason why we say Europe, Africa, and Asia is because all of these countries and all of these continents have been trading with each other. They are going to have products that will eventually make their way over to the Americas. And so these continents had been isolated from each other and had only been trading within each other. Now we're going to start seeing goods and resources traveling across the waters. So, for example, prior to 1492, you would never find bananas in South America, North America. You wouldn't find oranges there. You wouldn't find coffee beans there. Coffee beans originate from Ethiopia, oranges, bananas, Southeast Asia. And so these items are going to be brought over by explorers. And now we can't think of the Americas without having coffee beans inside of South America, or having bananas inside of Honduras, or having oranges inside of California or Florida. It's just part of a Columbian exchange. You're also going to have things inside of Europe that did not exist there until after 1492. Tomatoes come from the Americas. So imagine what Italian food looked like without tomato paste, without a tomato sauce. Potatoes are also originating from the Americas, and eventually you'll have the whole Irish population living off of potatoes. And when they experience a potato famine inside of the 19th century, it's going to be devastating for them. When prior to 1492, their civilization and their culture never ate potatoes because they never existed there. You have domesticated animals located in Europe, Africa, and Asia. So you have the horse, you have the pigs, you have the chickens. These domesticated animals did not exist in the Americas. So when you think about Native Americans, a lot of people think about Native Americans in the Wild West riding on horseback. Prior to 1492, those Native American civilizations did not have horses. And so these domesticated animals will eventually be introduced into the Americas and will be embraced by the civilizations located there. Um, they did have animals inside the Americas, of course. Things like the turkey is going to originate inside the Americas. They had dogs, but dogs existed on both sides of the globe. And so it gives you an idea that there are going to be exchanges made. Unfortunately, for the Native American population, not having close proximity to domesticated animals like pigs, chickens, horses, and cattle are going to leave them susceptible to what we call virgin soil epidemics. So a lot of the diseases that we get from animals. So when we think of things like the flu, you're getting that from chickens or birds. Other things like smallpox, you're going to be getting these from animals. So pigs and cattle, because of the close proximity to these domesticated animals, Europeans, Africans, Asians are going to have diseases that eventually allow them to build up immunity so that they can survive and pass that down from one generation to the next. Unfortunately, for Native Americans, they will not have those immunities to the diseases because they weren't around those domesticated animals. And so the first time that a disease ends up going into a population, it's known as a virgin soil epidemic, and it causes great devastation. It is estimated that 90% of the Native American population ended up dying upon contact by Europeans. And so if you think about this, imagine you were sitting inside of a classroom of 100 students and a alien race came into the classroom and ended up devastating the classroom, and 90 of those 100 students died and only 10 students survived in that classroom. You would end up losing a lot culturally. You would lose a lot of things intellectually. You would lose a lot of things emotionally. And so when Europeans came in large numbers after these diseases had swept through the Native American population, Europeans were often saying the Native Americans seem disorganized. They seem disoriented. There's not that many of them. There's so much land. And what had happened was that the Europeans that were arriving were starting to see fragmented societies, societies that were trying to recover after the devastating virgin soil epidemics. So, where did the Native American population come from? Some people have theorized that there was a time period where the entire Earth was one supercontinent known as Pangaea. And because of plate tectonics, these large plates underneath the Earth's surface, over time, scientists have theorized, of course, millions and millions of years this process would take, these continents slowly moved away from each other. Now, what we have confirmed is that the cradle of life began in Africa. So if we believe and embrace Pangaea, then we have to assume that people could have been inside of Africa, and at some point they could have simply walked into South America. And this could help explain the Native American population. And then over time, of course, the continents would separate, the people would separate, and they would end up building their own cultures. Now, many scientists don't embrace Native Americans coming from this supercontinent of Pangaea because they said by the time that humans were in existence, the continents were a lot further apart and isolated from each other in many ways. And so there was just no way for this Pangea experience to occur of Native American population. However, the reason why people still embrace in small numbers this idea of Pangea is because in Native American oral tradition inside of South America, they always say we came from the land of the East. And if we look at Pangea, we notice that Africa is east of South America. And so it makes sense with Native American oral traditions in South America. So that's something to throw out there. The Bering Land Bridge is going to be the idea or the theory that everyone embraces. Where at one point in the Ice Age, we have Asia, which will be connected to North America. And so this would create a land bridge where people that are living inside of Asia who are chasing the woolly mammoth or they're hunting uh, other animals or gathering berries, they would have the opportunity to, as they are hunting and gathering, enter into North America and eventually settle there, and eventually go from North America, go through Central America, and then eventually end up in South America. And most historians, most scientists agree this is how populations ended up arriving inside of the Americas. There are also there's also evidence that some of the Polynesian islands, people having great technology in regards to shipbuilding, they are going to be able to come over. And this is actually confirmed with some of the statues that we find inside of South America, which we'll take a look at in a second. So, early Native American civilization can be broken down into different time periods. Between 12,000 and 10,000 BCE, we have the Paleo Native Americans, and these are hunters and gatherers. Around 7,000 BCE, hybridation of corn is going to happen inside of the Americas. It is important to understand that once a society starts to cultivate agriculture of any sort, they're going to start building a civilization. And the reason why is because if you're a hunter gatherer, you move around from one location to the next because your existence depends on if there's berries, if there are fruits for you to gather, or if there's nuts for you to gather, or the animals that you're chasing. You are following them. Every civilization begins with agriculture, primarily because agriculture requires that you stay in a sedentary location. You are not able or you're not capable of going from one location to the next because if you do, someone can steal your crops that you're growing, or your crops will die because they're not being watered. And so it's important to understand that all great civilizations start with agriculture because people eventually establish their religious beliefs, they form some sort of education, political format, and they're all in a sedentary location. Land ownership happens. And so this is going to allow for civilizations to begin. The uh, oldest civilization that we can find are the Olmecs, and they created these huge statues, these big-headed statues, and these are similar statues found in Polynesian islands. And so it's important to to demonstrate that they had the technology and the ability to build these statues, but we don't know anything about this. And the reason why is because many of these Native American populations had oral traditions, or if they had written traditions, we cannot decipher them. Teotihuacan in 300 BCE is going to be the largest city in the world. And so Teotihuacan actually had pyramids. So this isn't in Egypt. This is going to be inside of what will be present day Mexico City. And we assume that these pyramids are going to be built for religious purposes, probably connected to their politics, but we don't know that much about exactly the origins of the people of Teotihuacan. The Mayans are going to be a notable group, and they're going to have their rise in the 600 CE, and then they're going to end up having a devastating collapse in the 900 CE. And so, this great civilization, many people might remember the Mayan calendar that ended in 2012, and so many people thought the world was going to end in 2012. So, if you were of the drinking age in 2012, you probably might have participated in the end of the world drinking binges that occurred. Um, but you're going to end up having the Mayans fall apart probably for the lack of resources, overpopulation in their land. They also live in an area where there were great hurricanes, and so they possibly could have had a natural disaster that they could not recover from. And then we also have to think about these are humans, and humans love to fight. And so a combination of this could easily wipe out any great civilization, even our civilizations today, if they have enough devastating natural disasters, if there's enough in inward fighting, or if there's an overpopulation issue, any of our civilizations, even today, could immediately fall apart. So the Native Americans that we know the most about are going to be the Native Americans that existed at the time period of Europeans. And the reason why is because Europeans had a written tradition, and in their written tradition, they wrote down everything. So if they saw something, they wrote it down. And so the largest Native American civilization is going to be the Inca. The Incan have a population between 12 million and 20 million. They're made up of four different city states and are located in what would be present day Chile, Peru, Bolivia. And so this is going to end up being the largest Native American civilization that will eventually be conquered by the Spanish. The Aztecs will be the second largest Native American civilization, a population ranging from 5 million to 11 million, and they're going to be located in what would be present day Mexico. They're made up of three city states, which will be their core states, and then they, of course, have the tributary states. And so there's a group of subjugated people. The Mixtecs, the Toltecs, and the Zapotecs will be subjugated people inside of the current day, what would be considered the current day Mexico area. Um, Europeans are also going to end up going into the Mississippi Valley. And so these will be Native Americans that will exist in the United States as we create the United States. And so the Spanish will initially encounter the Mississippians, and then later the French will come into the same area. What's interesting is the Mississippians are going to build these elaborate aqueducts where they're able to get water from the Mississippi River. They're able to have this wonderful agriculture, and they're going to be building their cities on top of these mounds. And that's what the Spanish found out about them. The Spanish also said that these people were very were very protective of their land, and so they actually run the Spanish out. What's interesting is so the Spanish arrived in 1539. They're kicked out, and in 1682 you have, this is like over 150 years later, you're going to have the French come to the same exact area. And what the French discover is that nothing's there. There are no aqueducts, there are no mound structures, there's nothing. All there are people wandering around. And so people at first thought either the Spanish were lying or the French were lying. But the reality is both were telling the truth. The Spanish arrived in 1539. They weren't able to stay, but what they did leave behind was disease. And so by the time the French arrive in 1682, it's been almost 150 years. And so when they arrive and they say, I saw nothing, these people look disoriented, they're both telling the truth. Virgin soil epidemic had ended up ravaging the Native American population. And so their descendants, the Seminole, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw Creek, don't even have the same technology as their ancestors. And this is why it's so important to understand that the virgin soil epidemics are going to have devastating consequences to Native American peoples. The Iroquois, you're going to hear a lot about as we create our country, is actually a confederacy of Native American groups. So no one would say, I'm an Iroquois person. That's just not happening. That's the name of the entire group that's working together. And so inside of the Iroquois Confederacy, you'll have the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca, and then eventually in 1722, the Tuscarora will end up entering into the Iroquois Confederacy. Now, the Iroquois are located in what is present day New York, and they're going to interact with the French, the Dutch, the English, and their population is about 50,000 people, and they're known as the Hawadasani people. The Hawadasani people are people that build structures of log cabins. And so these log cabins aren't like small one-room cabins. They're large, expansive, because they have to keep, their dogs and their fruits and their vegetables in there during those cold East Coast winters that we know of. And so the Iroquois we will be encountering throughout this semester with their interactions with the English, the Spanish, or the English, the French, and the Dutch. So let's move it a little bit west. The Spanish are going to end up encountering the Pueblo people, which will be located in present-day Arizona, New Mexico. And they'll also end up encountering the Native American populations inside of California. So the Pueblo people are going to get their name because they would build their homes out of mud and stone. And the Spanish, when they saw them, they essentially saw these houses kind of stacked on each other and they thought it looked like a little city. And so they called them the Pueblo people. It's a smaller population, so about 35,000 people. And they are going to end up um, having interesting interactions with the Spanish, which we'll talk about in future lectures. Um, in California, you're going to have the second largest diverse Native American population, approximately about 300,000 people. The largest diversity of Native American peoples was actually in what is present day the Mexico Valley, and so this is going to end up being a very diverse place. And so typically when we look at California, what we find is that the Native American groups can be linguistically separated. And so there are six major linguistic groups that we can kind of separate them into. Now, one of the interesting things about the Native Americans in California is that Native Americans in California never cultivated corn. They had no need to cultivate corn. So even though they traded with people that had corn, they didn't actually make their own corn. And the reason why was because California had a lot of natural resources. And so the native populations in California never had to harvest corn. And so even though you find corn growing in the eastern portion of the United States, the Midwest portion of the United States, South America, Central America, you find that in California, the natives are not in any sort of understanding of corn cultivation. So, one of the things that we will discover consistently is that there's going to be conflict between Native Americans and Europeans. And so, a lot of people try to figure out why this conflict is happening. And conflict during this time period, and perhaps even in our own time period, relate to three specific areas. Conflict is happening between Native Americans and Europeans in this time period because of either religion, land, or gender. So, religion in and of itself doesn't create conflict, but religion does create conflict when you're trying to get a group of people to come together. And sometimes religion, even within itself, because of how extreme some people can be, will also create conflict. Now, the conflict that we see with religion between Native Americans and Europeans, and please understand, I am going to be generalizing at this point. Um, Native Americans uh, see that the supernatural and the natural, or the spiritual and the natural, are all intertwined with each other. So, what that means is that a Native American person is going to look around, and even though the water is natural, they're going to give it a spiritual element. They believe that spirits live in the water, spirits live in the clouds, spirits live in the birds and the grass, spirits live everywhere. And so the natural and the supernatural and the spiritual are all connected together in Native American religions and cultures. Europeans who are coming from a Judeo Christian background see a separation between the natural and the spiritual, or the natural and the supernatural. Um, from the Judeo Christian European perspective, God is in heaven and God is a spiritual. The earth is the natural environment, and God had given them that earth so that they can do whatever they want with it. So Native Americans are very reluctant to overhunt or, destroy too much because they're afraid that they're going to harm the spirits. Whereas Europeans, when they're arriving, are like, God gave us this and we can exploit it as much as we want. And so this is going to lead to conflict because of this different understanding of the natural and the supernatural. You also are going to have religion trying to let us know what happens to us when we die. And so, from the Native American perspective, once you die, you all go to the same place. You all end up going to the afterlife. And so, whether you're a bad person or a good person, you go to the afterlife and you deal with the afterlife there. In the European culture, since they're coming from the Judeo Christian background, there are two different places to go. If you're a good person, you go to heaven and you're with God. If you are a bad person, you're damned and you're going to hell. And so, Europeans, when they come with their religion, they are going to try to convert Native Americans. And they tell the Native American population, hey, you need to be baptized so that you can go to heaven. And natives are like, okay, sounds cool. And they get baptized, and then they start asking questions. And so, one of the questions that Native Americans would ask all the time was, um, so I got baptized and I'm going to heaven, but my grandmother, she wasn't here when you guys arrived. Where is she going? Is she going to heaven? And of course, the missionary's like, well, did she get baptized? I'm like, no, my grandma didn't get baptized. She came before you came. And so she never heard about this stuff. And so they would say, oh, well, I'm sorry. I guess your grandma's going to hell. And for the Native American, they're thinking, well, what is life after death if I'm not with the people that I love and my ancestors? And so this is going to be one of the challenging things about Christianizing the Native Americans, saying that their ancestors are going to hell, are going to be in a different location than the natives that are able to be converted during European colonization. The other area of conflict is going to be land. So the idea of owning property, private property, is very foreign to Native Americans. Native Americans believe in sharing their land. And so one of the things that Native Americans would do is if you were their friend, you were always allowed to come on their property. You were always welcome. It's like if you had your own house and you said, you can come in my door anytime as long as you're my friend, and I will leave the door open for you. This isn't my fenced in property. Europeans have a perspective of land that we embrace today, and that is this is my property, this is my house. You may be my friend, and I might invite you over for Thanksgiving, but if I don't invite you, you have no business on my property, only when I invite you. And so, this concept of land ownership is going to be a bit of a problem. So there are sometimes Europeans are pulling the natives close, and other times the Europeans are pushing them away. Whereas Native Americans, they said, we're friends. So yes, at any time, come onto my property and hunt because this is all of our land to share together. Property ownership also connects to land and wealth. So from the European perspective, and we still embrace this today, um, the way that you show that you're wealthy is by holding on to items, holding on to money. So the richest person in the world is rich because they have a bank account with a whole lot of money in there. They're holding possessions, they're holding cash, they're holding money, and that's what makes them wealthy. Um, if you look at the Native Americans, what we find is that Native Americans believe that the only way to show that you're wealthy is by giving gifts. And so, in most Native American cultures, what you find is that they're giving gifts. The reason why they're giving gifts is because they want to show you, I'm a wealthy person. Look, I gave you this beautiful gift. I'm wealthy. And so, Europeans, when they come in contact with Native Americans, the Native Americans are like, oh, let's just show them that we have money and we're wealthy. And they give them Europeans a gift. And the Europeans are like, oh, thank you. And they take the gift, and the Native Americans may not receive anything back, or they receive some broken tools. And they're like, wow, these Europeans must be poor because they're not giving us nice things. Let's show them that we're really wealthy. Let's give them some more gifts. And this exchange of gifts and this taking by Europeans is going to be reciprocity that isn't equal in any sort of way. And so Europeans' understanding of wealth as holding on, Native Americans' understanding of wealth is by giving, is going to come into conflict under this idea of land ownership conflict. The last area of conflict between Native Americans and Europeans is going to be gender. Now, understand that a lot of times people interchange the word sex and gender, but when we look at sex and gender in history, sex is biological. So that means a man has certain biological components that makes him a male. A female has certain biological components that make her a female. And so sex is biological. So the male sex, the female sex, those are completely biological. Gender, however, is a cultural phenomenon. What it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman in a gender context is a cultural thing. So even though an African man, a Native American man, and a European man biologically have the same anatomy, their gender is going to be determined by their culture. So wearing blue might be a male color in one society, but it might not be a male color in another society. And that's because in that society, they determine what is masculine and what is feminine. And so this is going to lead to conflict because in their own separate areas, these gender norms work. However, when they all combine together, you're going to end up having conflict. So I'm going to generalize a little bit, and here is something that might help you understand the conflict. So one of the easiest ways to separate men and women is by giving them structured work, gendered work, essentially. So Africans, let's say the men in African societies, and I'm generalizing this, so please do not go and find an exception because you'll find many exceptions, but this is just to show the conflict. African males, let's say their responsibility in a society is to hunt. African females, let's say their responsibility is to do rice cultivation and watch kids. You notice that I gave them two items instead of one item because we all know that women work a lot harder. That was supposed to be a joke, but it just did not work. So, or maybe it's true. But rice cultivation and watching kids, I should not keep that in there. We're going to cut that out. Totally cutting that out. So African males are going to hunt. African females are going to do rice cultivation and watch kids. European males are going to farm Monday through Friday, and they're going to hunt for fun on Saturday. And the European female, she's going to watch kids. Native Americans are going to hunt, the men are, and the women are going to farm and watch kids. Now, when these people are their own separate areas, this works perfectly. However, when you connect these societies together, these groups of people together, you're going to have gender conflict. Think about it from the perspective of a European man. You go out and you start farming the land Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you look up every day and what you see is a Native American man running around hunting. You're going to have a thought that that Native American man is lazy. And the reason why is because you as a European man, according to this, you hunt for fun. But it seems like this Native American man is hunting every single day. So he's having fun, and you look over at his poor wife and you say, man, that wife is working so hard. She's farming the land. That's what I do as a European man. And she's watching her kids. And that's what my wife does. She's doing two people's worth of work while her husband is doing nothing. And so if you look at this from the perspective of a European looking at a Native American man, you're going to see conflict. Let's switch it. Let's use a Native American man's perspective of a European man. The Native American man is going to say, well, I hunt because I'm a man. But there's something wrong with this European man. He's farming the land like he's a woman. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And we all know that only women farm land. From the Native American perspective, he's going to say, there's something wrong with this guy who's out there farming the land Monday through Friday. And so this is creating gender conflict from the European perspective and from the Native American perspective. When we bring in African slavery, this is going to be devastating because let's say you're an African woman and you're doing rice cultivation in Africa. And then when you come to South Carolina, they say, do rice cultivation. Well, you know how to do it because you've been doing it in Africa. The information's been handed down from you from one generation to the next. You probably could tell the slave owner, hey, this is actually how you cultivate the rice. Now, if you're the African man and the slave owner says, get over there and start cultivating rice, you're going to be thinking, wait a second, that's what women do. Let me do something else, but I don't want to cultivate that rice. And when you start resisting and saying, no, 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 only women cultivate rice, and the slave owner starts beating you for that, you're going to feel feminized when you're forced to do that rice cultivation. And so this is creating these gender conflicts because in their own societies, doing the work that they're supposed to do in their own societies, it works because that's their idea of gender. But connecting these together, there's going to be discord because of these ideas of gender. Now, I think that we have to also understand that we're looking at a binary here. We're looking at a male gender and we're looking at a female gender. The reality is, especially if you look at Native American groups in California, Native American groups in Arizona, Native American groups inside of New Mexico, and even going further south, what we find is that Native American groups in these areas sometimes had as many as 5 genders. And so there wasn't just a male gender and a female gender, although that's all they would have biologically, male and female. What they're going to do is they're going to understand that there is same-sex relationships. And so, for example, the Spanish are going to encounter the Pueblo Native Americans, and the Pueblo Native Americans have something called the Berdache. Now, this is actually the Spanish name given to these men, but these men have sex with other men. So there would be men inside the Native American community who had a wife, and then they would pick a second wife. And their second wife would actually be a male that would dress like a female, but he would have male biology. And he essentially would do female work in this society. He wouldn't be able to give birth to children, of course, but they're having same sex relationships. And this is going to be perfectly normal for these Native American groups. Now, think about it from a European perspective. They come over and they see this and they're like, what's wrong with these people? However, the Native Americans are going to say, we've been doing this for centuries. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you as advanced in regards to gender and sexuality as we are? And so this gives you an idea of how gender is a construct that we create in our own personal societies as a way to honor and respect or as a way to dehumanize. And so this is going to be another area of conflict. So I think it's important to look at primary sources. And one of the primary sources that I find very compelling so we understand the experiences is a primary source that is written by a Captain Mancio Serra de la Guzman. And he's going to talk about how the natives were and how when the Spanish arrived, they destroyed everything that the natives had. He, in his statement, you can read this on your own, he essentially says on his deathbed that we destroyed what the natives had. And one of the most honest times in people's lives is right before they die. And so we have to understand that this deposition that he's giving is probably one of the most honest times in his life, where he's saying, we came here, we exploited them, and I really need to ask for forgiveness. And so this is why a lot of times when we talk about Native Americans and European encounters, we tend to say that Native Americans really did lose a lot because the Europeans, their ideas, their beliefs really took over what the Native Americans had. And that the Native Americans were not backwards in any sort of way, but because of maybe some of their openness and acceptance, it's going to end up causing their demise and, of course, their lack of immunities to diseases.